She's gone, or at least that's what everyone thought. Shocked silence. A billionaire's funeral had been scheduled, tears flowing, mourners sobbing, heartbroken. The entire city believed the unthinkable had happened, but in the midst of grief, one humble janitor noticed something no one else did. Trembling voice. He rushed against time, against disbelief, and against authority. The coffin was about to be closed when he shouted, "She's not dead!" Shocked shout. Silence fell like a heavy blanket. People froze, doctors froze, even the billionaire's own family couldn't believe their ears. Shocked silence. With trembling hands and a heart full of courage, this janitor acted, defying orders, risking everything, confident and strong. And what he discovered inside the hospital stunned everyone. Her body had stopped in a state so rare, so critical, that even the most experienced doctors had written her off. Fear and tension. But she wasn't gone, not yet, not really. Hopeful whisper. Now it was a race against time. Every second mattered. Every heartbeat was a miracle waiting to happen. Could she survive? Could the son watch his mother open her eyes one last time? Anxious tension. Through tears, fear, and impossible odds, the janitor's courage lit a spark of hope where there had been none, and the outcome would shock the world. Emotional climax. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you'll witness a story of courage, humanity, and the power of noticing what everyone else ignores. Dramatic pause, soft music. By the end of this story, you'll understand, sometimes one small voice can change everything. Powerful closure, upbeat music. Welcome to BrainFuel, the channel where real stories meet mind-blowing twists. Energetic. From unbelievable rescues to shocking life lessons, we bring you the stories that make you think, feel, and never look at the world the same way again. Excited? Hit subscribe and fuel your brain with the extraordinary. Confident and strong. Stop! She's not dead! The words tore through the grand funeral hall like thunder, louder than the soft music, louder than the quiet sobs, louder than grief itself. Every movement froze, conversations died mid-sentence, even the candles seemed to flicker in fear. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the voice, wide with disbelief. At the center of the hall stood a man no one had noticed before, a janitor. His uniform was old and faded, his shoes worn thin, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Sweat dripped down his forehead, not from work, but from fear and urgency. Yet his eyes burned with certainty. In front of him lay the golden coffin of one of the richest women in the city. Black roses surrounded it. Crystal chandeliers reflected sorrow. Powerful people dressed in black filled every seat. Business tycoons, politicians, celebrities. And yet the man who dared to speak wore nothing but courage. "Who said that?" someone whispered. Security guards rushed forward immediately. "Remove him," a deep voice ordered. "How dare you interrupt this sacred moment?" another guest snapped. The janitor flinched as the guards grabbed his arms, but he did not back down. His knees trembled, yet his voice grew stronger. "She is not dead," he repeated, louder this time. "Please, you have to believe me." Soft, mocking laughter rippled through the crowd. "Is this a joke?" a man scoffed. "Someone get this crazy man out," a woman said coldly. At the front row, the billionaire's son stood stiff and pale. His eyes were red from crying all night. He had watched doctors declare his mother dead. He had signed the papers. He had already said goodbye. He stepped forward, his voice shaking with pain. "My mother is gone," he said quietly but firmly, controlled anger. "This is her funeral. You have no right." "She moved," the janitor interrupted, urgent. The hall erupted again. "What did you say?" the son snapped. I saw her fingers move, the janitor said, swallowing hard, like she was trying to breathe. The guards tightened their grip. "That's enough," one guard shouted, but the janitor shook his head wildly. "No, please, I clean hospitals every day. I've seen bodies, I've seen death." Serious and urgent. This was different. Certain. A doctor near the stage scoffed loudly. "All vital signs were flat," he said. "Do you think you know better than medical professionals?" The janitor's eyes filled with tears. "I think I know what I saw," he replied, softly but humbly. "But if I'm wrong, then I'll leave. But if I'm right," his voice cracked, "then you are about to bury a living woman." The words hit the room like a slap. Shock waves. Several guests gasped. A woman covered her mouth. Another man looked away nervously. The billionaire's son felt his chest tighten painfully. Logic screamed this was impossible, but grief whispered cruel doubts. He stared at the coffin, his hands clenching slowly. "Get him out," someone yelled again, impatient anger. As the guards dragged the janitor backward, he shouted with everything he had left. "Please, just 1 minute! 1 minute could save her life!" His voice echoed raw and broken. The music stopped completely. The son raised his hand slightly without realizing it. Hesitant gesture. "Wait," he whispered, uncertain. Everyone froze again, suspended time. The guards paused, confused. The son stepped closer to the coffin, his legs feeling weak. He looked at the janitor, this trembling stranger who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, searching for truth. "You're sure?" he asked quietly, fragile hope. The janitor nodded immediately. "Yes," he said, tears streaming freely now, crying softly, "with my whole soul, absolute conviction." The room filled with uneasy whispers, fear and disbelief. No one knew it yet, but in that single moment, death itself was about to be questioned, and everything was about to change. The moment the janitor's words hung in the air, the tension inside the funeral hall doubled. What had been a place of controlled grief suddenly felt dangerous, unstable, as if one wrong breath could shatter everything. "Get him out, now!" The command came sharply from the head of security. 2 guards stepped forward aggressively, their shoes echoing against the marble floor. The janitor gasped, his heart pounding violently against his chest. "Please, please don't drag me away," he cried. "I'm not here to cause trouble, I'm here to stop a tragedy." The crowd reacted instantly. Some shook their heads in annoyance, others whispered angrily among themselves. "This is disgusting," a wealthy woman muttered. "Attention seeker," another man scoffed. "Ruining a funeral," someone whispered sharply. The janitor felt the weight of hundreds of eyes judging him. His legs weakened, but he forced himself to stay upright. His gaze kept returning to the golden coffin, resting silently under soft lights. At the front, the billionaire's son clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. His jaw trembled, not just with anger, but with pain so deep it burned. "You think this is a joke?" he snapped suddenly, his voice cutting through the noise. He stepped forward, standing only a few feet away from the janitor. "Today is the worst day of my life, and you choose now to shout lies?" The janitor's eyes filled with tears instantly. "I swear on my life I'm not lying," he said softly. "I have no reason to lie." The son laughed bitterly, the sound empty and broken. "My mother was examined by the best doctors in the country," he said. "Machines confirmed it, reports confirmed it. She is gone." With every word, the janitor felt smaller, weaker, but then, like a spark in the darkness, his memory returned sharply. "I was cleaning the hospital corridor," the janitor said suddenly, louder now. "They wheeled her past me. Everyone else walked away. But I didn't," he continued, his voice shaking but steady. I saw her hand, just a tiny movement, like this. I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard a breath. A hush slowly crept across the hall. That's impossible, a doctor interrupted sharply. He stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. Her heart had stopped, her brain showed no activity. The janitor turned toward him. "Sir," he said respectfully, "I don't understand machines. I don't understand reports, but I understand people." And she didn't feel gone. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others avoided eye contact with the coffin. "This is madness," a man whispered. What if he's right?" another murmured. The billionaire's son pressed his fingers against his temple, breathing heavily. His heart and mind were pulling him in opposite directions. Trust science or trust a stranger with nothing to gain? "Enough," he said suddenly, his voice breaking slightly. "I won't allow this circus." The guards tightened their grip again. "Move," one of them growled. The janitor felt himself being dragged backwards. Panic surged through his chest like fire. "No," he shouted. "Please, just listen. If I'm wrong, you can throw me out, you can punish me. But if I'm right," his voice cracked deeply, "then every second you waste is killing her." Those words hit the son like a blade. Killing her. The thought alone made his stomach twist painfully. He looked again at the coffin. The polished gold surface reflected his broken face. His mother had always taught him to listen even to those society ignored. The music, which had restarted quietly, suddenly felt unbearable. "Stop the music," he whispered. The sound died instantly. Dead silence. Everyone froze again. The janitor, now half dragged towards the exit, felt his hope slipping away. Tears streamed down his cheeks freely. His entire body shook. "I don't want money," he cried. "I don't want attention. I just don't want her buried alive." The son raised his hand slowly. "Wait," he said again, louder this time. The guard stopped. The hall held its breath. The son walked towards the janitor step by step. He looked directly into the janitor's eyes. What he saw there wasn't madness, it was terror mixed with conviction. "You understand what you're saying?" he asked quietly. "If you're wrong, I will accept whatever punishment you give me," the janitor replied instantly. "But please, don't ignore this chance." A long, painful silence followed. The son closed his eyes briefly, fighting tears. When he opened them, his voice trembled. "Give him 1 minute," he said. Gasps spread across the hall. 1 minute. No one knew it yet, but that single minute was about to decide between life and death. The words 1 minute echoed through the funeral hall like a fragile lifeline thrown into deep water. No one spoke. No one moved. The crowd that moments ago had been loud with anger now stood trapped in a thick, uncomfortable silence. The janitor felt his legs weaken as the guards finally loosened their grip. His shoulders sagged, not from victory, but from the crushing weight of responsibility. 1 minute, 60 seconds, that was all he had to prove the impossible. He wiped his tears with the back of his shaking hand. His heart pounded so loudly in his chest that he feared others could hear it. Slowly, carefully, he stepped forward toward the golden coffin. Every step felt like walking into fire. The billionaire's son stood close by, his face pale, eyes burning with conflict. His fists unclenched, then clenched again. He watched the janitor with a mixture of anger, fear, and a dangerous spark of hope. "If you're wrong," the son whispered, his voice barely audible. The janitor nodded immediately. "I know," he replied softly, "and I accept it." A doctor stepped forward sharply. "This is pointless," he muttered. "You're giving false hope." The janitor did not look at him. His eyes were locked on the coffin. He placed his trembling palm on the cold, polished gold surface. The chill traveled up his arm. He closed his eyes for a brief second. "I'm sorry," he whispered toward the coffin, "if I'm wrong." The room felt impossibly quiet. Even the chandeliers seemed frozen in time. Slowly, the janitor leaned closer, lowering himself with great care. He pressed his ear gently against the coffin lid. His breath slowed as he listened with everything he had. Seconds passed. The crowd leaned forward without realizing it. Some guests held their breath. Others looked away, unable to bear the moment. The janitor's brow tightened. His lips parted slightly as he strained to hear anything at all. At first, there was nothing. His heart sank painfully. Doubt crashed into him like a wave. What if I imagined it? What if grief fooled me? His hands began to shake harder. Then, a faint sound, so soft it could barely be called sound at all. The janitor's eyes flew open. He leaned closer, pressing his ear more firmly. There it was again, a slow, shallow breath. His body stiffened. Tears filled his eyes instantly. "She's breathing," he whispered. The words barely left his mouth, but they landed like thunder. "What did he say?" someone murmured. "He's lying," another whispered. The janitor lifted his head slowly, his face pale but glowing with certainty. "She's alive," he said louder now, confident and urgent. "I can hear her." Steady truth. The billionaire's son took a step forward without realizing it. Uncontrolled hope. His chest tightened painfully, rising panic. "That's enough," the doctor snapped. "This has gone far enough." "No," the janitor replied firmly. He straightened his back despite his shaking legs. "Open the coffin." Clear demand. Gasps exploded across the hall. "Open it?" someone exclaimed. "This is madness," another cried. The son froze, paralyzed fear. Opening the coffin meant destroying the final goodbye he had prepared, but not opening it meant risking the unthinkable. The janitor turned to him slowly, respectful appeal. "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't sure. Please." Pleading. The son's hands trembled violently. Tears streamed down his face again. "Mom," he whispered, broken love. The doctor shook his head sharply. "This is against all protocol," he warned. The son looked at him with wet, furious eyes. "And burying my mother alive wouldn't be?" he snapped. Emotional outburst. The room gasped again, stunned reaction. For the first time, the doctor had no answer, silenced pride. The son turned back toward the coffin, his entire body shaking, unsteady decision. He raised his hand slowly, hesitant command. "Open it," he whispered, trembling voice. Time seemed to stop, frozen moment. Two attendants exchanged terrified glances. Their hands shook as they reached for the coffin lid. The janitor stepped back, pressing his palms together tightly. Silent prayer. His lips moved without sound. Desperate hope. The lid creaked softly as it began to rise. Suspensive sound. The crowd leaned forward as one, collective shock. As the coffin opened, the billionaire woman's pale face came into view. Her skin was cold, her lips slightly parted. Fragile stillness. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Heart-stopping pause. The janitor's heart nearly stopped, crushing fear. Then, her chest moved, just slightly. Undeniable life. A scream cut through the hall, terror and shock. "She moved!" someone cried. Panicked voice. The doctor staggered backward, shattered confidence. "That's impossible," he whispered, disbelief. The son collapsed to his knees beside the coffin. "Mom!" he cried, broken sob. The janitor covered his face with both hands as tears poured freely. His entire body shook. Emotional release. "She's alive," he whispered again, awe and gratitude. "Thank God." Relieved faith. The funeral hall, once filled with death, now trembled with the fragile presence of life. Emotional turning point. And everyone standing there knew nothing would ever be the same again. The scream echoed again and again inside the grand hall, bouncing off marble walls and crystal chandeliers. What had once been a place of quiet mourning was now drowning in shock, fear, and disbelief. "She moved!" someone shouted. "I saw it!" another voice cried. The billionaire's son dropped fully to his knees beside the open coffin. His hands trembled as he reached toward his mother, then froze in midair. He was terrified to touch her, terrified to hope, terrified to breathe. "Mom?" he whispered. Her chest rose again, barely noticeable but undeniable. The janitor stepped forward instinctively. "She's struggling," he said. "She needs help now." Doctors who had earlier stood proud and confident now looked pale and shaken. One of them rushed forward, nearly tripping over his own feet. He leaned over the coffin, pressing 2 fingers against the woman's neck. "There's a pulse," he whispered. His voice cracked as he looked up at the others. Disbelief. "It's weak, but it's there." The hall exploded with noise. "Oh my God! She's alive! How could this happen?" Security guards stood frozen, unsure what to do. Guests backed away from the coffin in fear, some crying openly, others clutching their chests. The son pressed his forehead against the edge of the coffin. "Please, don't leave me again," he whispered. The janitor placed a gentle hand on the son's shoulder. His own hands were shaking violently. "She's fighting," he said quietly. "You have to fight with her." Another doctor snapped out of his shock and barked orders. "Call an ambulance now! We need oxygen, IV access, cardiac support." Phones came out, voices overlapped, someone knocked over a chair. The elegant hall now felt like a battlefield between life and death. The billionaire woman let out a faint, almost inaudible sound. Her lips trembled slightly. Her eyelids fluttered, struggling to open. The son gasped sharply. "She's trying to wake up," he cried. One doctor carefully placed an oxygen mask over her face. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked. Her eyes opened just a fraction, unfocused and glassy. The janitor stepped back slowly, his knees finally giving in. He sat heavily on a chair, covering his mouth with both hands. Tears streamed down his face as the reality hit him fully. "I was right," he whispered. "She's alive." A woman from the crowd began crying uncontrollably. "We almost buried her," she sobbed. The earlier mocking voices were gone. Faces that once showed arrogance were now filled with fear and regret. The senior doctor who had dismissed the janitor earlier stepped back slowly. His hands shook as he removed his glasses. "This shouldn't have happened," he murmured. "We failed." The son looked up at him with tear-filled eyes blazing with anger. "You almost killed her," he said, "because you were too sure of yourselves." The doctor lowered his head. He had no defense left. Sirens could be heard faintly in the distance. The ambulance was on its way. As doctors worked urgently around the coffin, the janitor stood slowly on unsteady legs. People moved aside instinctively, creating space for him. The son turned toward him suddenly. "You," he said, his voice breaking. The janitor froze. "You saved my mother," he continued, tears streaming freely. He grabbed the janitor's hands tightly. "You saved her life." The janitor shook his head, overwhelmed. "No, I just listened," he replied softly. The ambulance crew rushed in moments later. Stretchers rolled across the marble floor, replacing flowers and sorrow. The billionaire woman was carefully lifted from the coffin. As they moved her, she suddenly coughed weakly, a shocked hope. The sound was small but powerful. The son let out a broken laugh through his tears. "She's alive! She's really alive!" he whispered. Guests stood frozen, watching the impossible unfold. Some whispered prayers, others simply stared, unable to process what they were seeing. As the stretcher rolled towards the exit, the janitor followed quietly a few steps behind. No one stopped him now. Just before the doors closed, the billionaire woman's hand twitched again. "She's still fighting," he whispered. The doors shut behind the stretcher. Sirens grew louder as the ambulance sped away. The hall was left in ruins, flowers trampled, chairs overturned, dignity shattered. The son stood alone near the open coffin, breathing heavily. He turned slowly to the janitor, his eyes filled with a respect that had never been there before. "I judged you," he said quietly. "We all did." The janitor shook his head gently. "Sometimes," he replied calmly. "Life speaks softly. You just have to listen." That moment changed everything. The funeral had ended, but a miracle had begun. The ambulance doors slammed shut with a heavy thud, and the sound echoed through the broken silence of the funeral hall. Sirens wailed louder and louder as the vehicle sped away, carrying the billionaire woman between life and death. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The air felt thin, as if everyone had forgotten how to breathe. The golden coffin stood open and empty at the center of the hall. Flowers lay scattered on the floor, chairs overturned, dignity shattered. What was meant to be a farewell had turned into a nightmare narrowly avoided. The billionaire's son stood frozen near the coffin, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. Just minutes ago, he had believed his mother was gone forever. Now she was fighting for her life in the back of an ambulance. He dragged a hand down his face, smearing tears across his cheeks. "I almost buried her," he whispered to himself. His legs buckled slightly, and he had to grab the edge of the coffin to stay upright. As far away across the hall, the janitor leaned against a marble pillar, his entire body trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. His knees felt like they might give out at any second. He pressed a hand against his chest, trying to slow his racing heart. "I did it. I really did it," he murmured. Tears streamed freely down his weathered face. Not tears of pride, but tears of gratitude that he had been heard just in time. Around them, guests slowly began to process what had happened. Some sat down heavily, covering their faces. Others stood in small groups, whispering urgently. "We were minutes away," a woman whispered. "This is a miracle," another replied. The doctors gathered near the stage, their faces pale and tight. The confidence they had carried earlier was gone, replaced by shock and guilt. One of them rubbed his temples repeatedly, his hands still shaking. "That condition," a younger doctor muttered, "it mimics death almost perfectly." "We should have waited longer," another replied. "We should have double-checked," a third whispered. The senior doctor, the one who had dismissed the janitor so harshly, stood apart from the others. He stared at the empty coffin, his reflection staring back at him from the polished gold. His shoulders slumped under the weight of what almost happened. The billionaire's son turned toward the doctors suddenly. His eyes burned red, not just from crying, but from anger held back by shock. "You were so sure," he said quietly. "All of you." No one met his gaze. "We followed protocol," one doctor said weakly. "And almost killed her," the son snapped. His voice cracked under the force of his emotions. "If he hadn't spoken up—" His eyes shifted to the janitor across the hall. The room followed his gaze. Conversations died instantly. The janitor stiffened when he realized everyone was looking at him, his knees still slightly weak. He straightened his uniform awkwardly, unsure what to do with his hands. Years of being invisible made the attention feel heavy and uncomfortable. The son walked towards him slowly. Each step echoed loudly against the marble floor. The janitor swallowed hard, his throat dry. He expected anger, maybe punishment. Instead, the son stopped in front of him and bowed his head slightly. "Thank you," he said. The janitor blinked in surprise. I just did what anyone should," he replied softly. His voice shook despite his effort to stay calm. "No," the son said firmly. Tears filled his eyes again. "You did what no one else was brave enough to do." Before the janitor could react, the son reached out and pulled him into a tight embrace. The janitor froze for a second, then slowly returned the hug. The crowd gasped quietly. "I owe you my mother's life," he whispered into his shoulder. The janitor's lips trembled as he fought back fresh tears. "I only listened," he replied again. "Sometimes that's enough." Several guests wiped their eyes openly now. The mood of the hall had shifted completely, from arrogance and certainty to humility and awe. Moments later, a call came through on the son's phone. He answered immediately, his breath caught in his throat. "Yes?" he said. A pause. Everyone watched his face closely. His eyes widened slightly, then filled with tears. "She has a pulse," he said into the phone. Another pause. "She's stable. For now," he whispered. The hall erupted in quiet sobs and whispered prayers. The son closed his eyes and pressed the phone to his chest. He looked back at the janitor, his expression changed forever. "She's alive," he said. The janitor closed his eyes and nodded slowly. Thankful silence. Outside, the sirens faded into the distance. Inside, the funeral hall stood transformed, not as a place of death, but as a reminder of how close arrogance had come to stealing a life. The janitor glanced once more at the empty coffin. "That box almost became her grave," he murmured. "But it didn't," the son replied, "because of you." And in that moment, surrounded by shattered flowers and humbled hearts, everyone understood a painful truth. Life doesn't always listen to titles, wealth, or authority. Sometimes it listens to the quiet voice no one thinks to hear. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and fear. Bright white lights stretched endlessly above, buzzing softly like restless thoughts that refused to settle. The billionaire's son paced back and forth, his footsteps sharp against the polished floor. Every few seconds, he looked toward the ICU doors, as if staring hard enough might make them open. Behind those doors, his mother was fighting for her life. The janitor sat on a cold metal bench a few feet away. His shoulders were slumped, his hands folded tightly together as if holding on to an invisible thread. Now that everything had slowed down, the fear he had held back began to wash over him in waves. "What if I was wrong?" the thought returned cruelly. "What if I delayed peace for nothing?" He squeezed his eyes shut, pushing the thoughts away. He had done what he believed was right. That had to be enough. Doctors rushed past them, speaking in urgent tones. Words like rare condition, false death, and critical window floated through the air. None of it sounded comforting. The son stopped pacing suddenly. He leaned against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. His head fell into his hands as his shoulders began to shake. "I almost lost her," he whispered. "I almost said goodbye forever." The janitor looked up, startled. Slowly, hesitantly, he stood and walked toward him. He stopped a short distance away, unsure if he was welcome. "It's not over yet," the janitor said softly. "She's strong." The son looked up at him, eyes red and hollow. "You don't know my mother," he said. The janitor nodded. "But I know life," he replied quietly, "and she wants to stay." Silence fell between them, not awkward, heavy, shared. Hours crawled painfully slow. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second landing like a hammer on their nerves. Nurses passed occasionally, offering polite but empty smiles. The janitor's stomach growled softly. He hadn't eaten all day, but hunger felt unimportant compared to the knot in his chest. He clasped his hands tighter, knuckles whitening. At one point, a nurse approached him. "Sir," she said gently, "you can wait in the staff area if you'd like." He shook his head immediately. "I'll stay here," he replied firmly. "I need to know she's okay." The nurse studied him for a moment, then nodded with quiet respect. The son watched this exchange closely. Something inside him shifted again. This man owed them nothing, no money, no status, no reward, and yet he stayed. "You don't have to be here," the son said after a while. The janitor turned to him. "I know," he answered simply, "but I want to be." The son swallowed hard. "Most people disappear when things get hard," he said. The janitor gave a small, sad smile. "Some of us can't afford to," he replied. Night settled outside the hospital windows. The city lights blinked on, distant and uncaring. Inside, time seemed suspended. Finally, the ICU doors opened slightly. A doctor stepped out, removing his gloves slowly. Both men stood at once. The son's heart slammed against his ribs. "How is she?" he asked immediately. The doctor took a breath. "She's stable," he said, "but she's not out of danger. She has a rare neurological condition that mimics death. Her vitals dropped so low they fooled our equipment." The son closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. And will she wake up?" he asked, trembling hope. "We don't know yet," the doctor replied honestly, "but she has a chance now because someone spoke up." His eyes shifted toward the janitor. Rahim felt heat rise to his face. "I just noticed something," he said quickly. The doctor shook his head. "Most people don't," he said quietly. When the doctor walked away, the son turned fully toward the janitor. His eyes glistened under the harsh lights. "You didn't have to risk everything," he said. Rahim shrugged lightly. "I've lived my whole life being ignored," he replied calmly. "What's one more if it saves someone?" The son felt something tighten painfully in his chest. He reached into his pocket, then stopped himself. Money suddenly felt insulting. Instead, he extended his hand. "My name is Daniel," he said. Rahim looked surprised, then took his hand carefully. "I'm Rahim," he replied. They shook hands, not as rich and poor, but as two men standing on the same fragile ground. Hours later, just before dawn, a soft beep echoed from inside the ICU. A nurse rushed past them with urgency. Moments later, the ICU doors opened again. "She's waking up," the nurse said in an excited whisper. Daniel's breath caught painfully. "My mother?" he asked in disbelief. The nurse nodded. Daniel covered his mouth as tears spilled freely. He turned instinctively toward Rahim. "She's waking up," he whispered, trembling happiness. Rahim closed his eyes, his lips moving silently. His shoulders sagged as the final weight lifted. As dawnlight filtered through the windows, both men stood side by side, exhausted but hopeful. What had begun as a funeral had become a lesson written in fear, courage, and humility. Life had nearly slipped away that day, and it had been saved not by power or wealth, but by attention, compassion, and the courage to speak when everyone else stayed silent. The ICU was quiet now, but the atmosphere was thick with tension and cautious hope. Machines beeped rhythmically, small indicators of life that had once been absent. The billionaire woman lay on the hospital bed, still fragile, her chest rising slowly with each shallow breath. Her eyelids fluttered as she moved between unconsciousness and awareness. Daniel, her son, remained seated beside the bed, holding her hand delicately. His knuckles were white from gripping so tightly, yet he refused to let go. He glanced at the janitor, Rahim, who had been standing silently near the door, his own eyes filled with relief and disbelief. "I can't believe this," Daniel whispered, voice cracking with emotion. "She's alive, after everything." Rahim gave a small nod, his face softening. "Sometimes the smallest actions make the biggest difference," he said quietly. Daniel looked at him, studying his worn hands and gentle eyes. "You saved her," he said, barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to thank you." Rahim shook his head slowly. "Don't thank me. I just listened when no one else did, that's all." A nurse entered the room quietly, carrying a clipboard and checking the monitors. "Her vitals are stable now," she reported softly. "We'll keep her sedated a little longer, but she's responding well to treatment." Daniel exhaled shakily. "Stable? After what happened?" he muttered. Rahim stepped closer to the bed, his eyes fixed on the woman lying there. "She fought," he said simply. "She wanted to live. She was never truly gone." For hours, Daniel and Rahim stayed by her side, speaking softly, sometimes in silence, just being present. Each beep of the monitor brought a new wave of hope or fear. The weight of what had happened, the funeral, the near burial, the disbelief pressed down on them both. Eventually, the woman stirred more noticeably, her fingers twitching gently. Her eyelids opened just a fraction, glassy and unfocused, but unmistakably alive. Daniel leaned in closer, holding her hand tightly. "Mom, it's me," he whispered. "I'm here. You're safe now." She blinked slowly, attempting to focus on his face. A faint tear escaped from the corner of her eye, sliding down her cheek. Rahim stepped back slightly, giving them space. He watched as the son and mother slowly reconnected, his heart swelling with quiet satisfaction. Minutes passed, each second a careful negotiation between hope and fragility. The woman's breathing steadied, growing stronger and more consistent with each passing moment. Daniel's tears fell freely now, crying openly. "You're alive! You're really alive!" he repeated, voice choked with emotion. The woman's lips moved slightly, attempting to speak, but no sound came. Daniel leaned closer, brushing her hair gently away from her face. "It's okay, Mom. Just rest. You're safe." Rahim remained near the edge of the bed, silently reflecting on the day's events. The journey from the funeral hall to this moment had been fraught with fear, anger, disbelief, and hope. Yet despite all odds, life had persisted. Hours turned into night, and the hospital lights cast a soft glow over the room. Daniel had not left her side, and Rahim had stayed as well, a silent protector. Each minute brought more clarity. The woman's movements became stronger, her eyes sharper, and her grip firmer. The doctors and nurses continued to monitor her, impressed by the rapid improvement considering the severity of her condition. They whispered to one another, sharing glances of astonishment and relief. Rahim finally broke the silence. "Daniel," he said softly, "she's fighting, but she'll need time. Your presence here matters more than anything right now." Daniel nodded, gripping his mother's hand more firmly. "I'll stay. I won't leave her. Not again." The woman stirred more intentionally, her fingers curling around Daniel's hand, a sign of recognition. A faint, weak smile touched her lips, the first sign of acknowledgement. Tears streamed down Daniel's face uncontrollably. "She's awake. She's really awake," he repeated, voice choked with emotion. Rahim smiled quietly, the first genuine smile since the chaos of the funeral. "See? Sometimes listening can save a life," he said softly. As the night deepened, Daniel finally leaned back, exhausted but grateful. He remained alert, however, watching every subtle movement his mother made. Rahim took a step toward the door, ready to leave, but Daniel stopped him. "Don't go," he said softly, voice still trembling. "I don't know what I would have done without you today." Rahim paused, then nodded gently. "I'll stay as long as you need me," he said. The woman's breathing grew steadier with each passing hour, her body regaining warmth and color. The monitors reflected her gradual stabilization, offering the first real confirmation that she would survive the night. By the early morning hours, the son, mother, and janitor had formed a quiet bond, an unspoken understanding born from fear, trust, and shared experience. The crisis had revealed not only courage, but also the depth of care and humanity in those who were often overlooked. Finally, Daniel whispered once more, brushing his mother's hand gently. "You're going to be okay, Mom. We're not letting go again." The woman's eyelids fluttered, and she grasped his hand slightly tighter, a faint but unmistakable acknowledgement. Rahim stepped back, watching the scene quietly. The miracle of the day was not just that she had survived, but that compassion, attentiveness, and courage had changed the course of fate. Outside the room, the first light of dawn crept through the windows, casting a soft glow over the hospital corridor. The world continued, but for those inside the ICU, life had been rewritten. Daniel sat back in his chair, exhausted but alert, holding his mother's hand. Rahim remained nearby, a silent witness to the fragile miracle that had unfolded. The day had started with grief, despair, and disbelief, but it would end with hope, gratitude, and a powerful reminder that sometimes the smallest voices, like that of a humble janitor, can change everything. And in that quiet ICU, as the machines beeped softly and life regained its rhythm, a lesson echoed through the hearts of all who witnessed it. Courage and attentiveness are often more powerful than wealth or authority, and the right action at the right time can save a life. The morning sun spilled softly through the hospital windows, painting the ICU in a gentle golden light. The room that had been tense with fear and uncertainty was now filled with quiet hope. The billionaire woman lay in her bed, her breathing steady, the color slowly returning to her cheeks. Every subtle movement, every tiny flicker of her eyelids felt monumental to Daniel and Rahim. Daniel sat in a chair beside her bed, his body stiff and exhausted, yet his eyes remained locked on his mother. Every time she stirred, he leaned closer, whispering softly, "Mom, it's me. I'm right here. You're safe." Rahim stood a few steps back, leaning against the wall. He watched carefully, noticing the small signs the others might have missed, the slight twitch of her fingers, the faint movement of her lips, the subtle rise and fall of her chest. His presence was quiet but grounding, a steady anchor amid the lingering tension. The nurse approached, clipboard in hand, her expression cautiously optimistic. "She's showing remarkable recovery," she said softly. "Vitals are stable, neurological response is improving, and she's beginning to regain strength." Daniel's eyes widened, tears welling up again. "She's going to make it," he whispered. "She really is going to make it." Rahim nodded, his expression calm but proud. "I told you," he said quietly. "She was never truly gone." For the next several hours, Daniel and Rahim watched over her, speaking in soft tones, recounting memories and stories she might recognize once she fully awoke. The room felt sacred in its quiet intimacy. Every sound, the faint beep of monitors, the gentle breathing, the occasional murmur of a nurse, seemed amplified, holding immense significance. Finally, the woman's eyelids opened wider, her gaze meeting Daniel's. "Mom, it's me," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "You're okay. You're awake." Her lips moved slightly, forming the faintest whisper. Daniel leaned in closer, encouraging her. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're safe. We're here." Tears streamed down Daniel's face freely. Rahim, too, felt a wave of emotion he struggled to contain. He took a careful step closer, offering silent support, yet giving space for the reunion between mother and son. The woman's fingers twitched and found Daniel's hand, gripping it weakly but intentionally. Her eyes, now slightly clearer, focused on him. "You're here," she whispered, voice hoarse but unmistakable. "Yes, Mom," Daniel replied, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I'm here. I won't leave you." Rahim allowed himself a small smile, seeing the bond they had shared rekindled. The moment was powerful, raw, and filled with the kind of emotional gravity that could leave one breathless. Hours passed as they continued to speak softly, keeping her engaged and gently encouraging her to move. The subtle changes in her condition were remarkable. She began to respond to questions, her fingers tightened in acknowledgement, and a weak but genuine smile formed on her lips. Daniel glanced at Rahim, gratitude evident in his expression. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly, voice thick. "I know you saved her. You really saved her." Rahim shook his head, humility clear in his eyes. "I didn't save her," he said softly. "I just noticed what everyone else ignored, that's all." Daniel looked at him. The depth of understanding in his gaze spoke louder than words. He realized that without Rahim's attention, courage, and humanity, the outcome could have been devastating. The doctors returned to the room periodically, monitoring vitals and ensuring she remained stable. They expressed cautious amazement at the rapid improvement. One of them, who had been skeptical at the funeral, approached Rahim. "You were right," the doctor admitted quietly, humbled. "If you hadn't spoken up, we don't even want to imagine." Regret and admiration. Rahim nodded simply, maintaining his calm demeanor, humble. "I only noticed something that mattered," he replied, soft certainty. "Sometimes listening is all it takes." The sun climbed higher in the sky, spilling light into the room and filling it with warmth. It seemed almost symbolic, a second chance, a new beginning for a woman who had nearly been lost. Daniel continued speaking softly to his mother, recounting memories from her childhood, their family holidays, and everyday moments she might remember. Every word, every story seemed to anchor her more firmly to life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the woman's voice grew stronger, more intentional. "Daniel," she whispered, eyes focusing clearly now. "Yes, Mom," Daniel replied, immediately squeezing her hand. I'm here," she said, her voice trembling but audible. Tears flowed freely from Daniel's eyes, and even Rahim felt a lump rise in his throat. The ICU, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now hummed with quiet relief and hope. The woman's recovery was still fragile, but the most critical step had been taken. Life had returned. With careful monitoring, continued care, and the unwavering presence of those who loved her, she had a real chance at full recovery. Daniel looked at Rahim once more, gratitude radiating from every gesture. "You stayed," he said softly. "Through everything. You didn't leave. You gave her a chance." Rahim nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "Sometimes the right choice isn't easy," he said, "but it can change everything." As the day progressed, the mother began to respond more consistently, her eyes opening fully, her fingers grasping Daniel's hand with renewed strength. She even attempted a faint smile, a small yet powerful signal that life had been reclaimed. Daniel leaned closer, whispering into her ear. "You're going to be okay," he said. "We're not letting go again." Rahim watched quietly, his heart full. The events of the past day had been a roller coaster of despair, disbelief, courage, and hope. And now, finally, the woman was awake, alive, and reclaiming her place in the world. Outside the ICU, the first light of dawn bathed the hospital in a soft glow. It was a silent testament to the miracle that had unfolded, a reminder that attentiveness,
courage and compassion could overcome even the most impossible odds. Daniel squeezed his mother's hand one last time for strength. "We're together now," he whispered. Rahim gave a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement of the part he had played. And in that quiet hospital room, the lesson was clear. Sometimes it takes the smallest voices and the most unexpected courage to save a life. The mother, though still weak, now opened her eyes fully, looking at her son and Rahim. Her eyes, still glassy but alert, locked on their faces. In that gaze was recognition, gratitude, and the first spark of a life renewed. For Daniel, Rahim, and all who had witnessed the impossible, the day was no longer about grief, fear, or loss. It was about life, hope, and the profound impact of one person choosing to act when others hesitated.
By late morning, the ICU had settled into a cautious calm. The rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft hum of ventilators created a strange symphony, a delicate balance between fragility and resilience. The billionaire woman lay in her bed, pale but breathing steadily, her movements more deliberate than before. Every subtle twitch of a finger or flutter of an eyelid carried monumental significance for Daniel and Rahim. Daniel had not left her side since the night before. His body ached from exhaustion, but he refused to close his eyes for even a moment. Each shallow breath she took reassured him. Each pulse in her wrist reminded him of the miracle unfolding before them. Rahim, standing quietly at the foot of the bed, observed her with calm attentiveness. Years of experience as a janitor had taught him to notice the small, easily overlooked details that had saved her life. The way her fingers twitched when Daniel spoke, the faint movement of her eyes toward familiar voices, the rhythm of her breathing, all spoke volumes. A nurse entered, checking the monitors and adjusting the oxygen flow. "She's holding steady," the nurse said softly. "Her vitals are consistent and neurological responses are improving. She may start to regain strength gradually over the next few days." Daniel's eyes filled with tears, unable to restrain his emotions any longer. "She's going to make it," he whispered, his voice trembling. Rahim nodded, a rare smile breaking his usually composed demeanor. "I told you," he said softly, "she was never truly gone." For the next several hours, Daniel spoke softly to his mother, recounting memories, sharing stories, and reminding her of familiar places and faces. Each word seemed to anchor her back to life, gently tugging her consciousness toward awareness. The subtle changes in her responses, a faint squeeze of his hand, a flutter of her lips, a weak but intentional blink, filled the room with cautious optimism. Suddenly, the woman's eyes focused more clearly on Daniel. A weak but intentional smile tugged at her lips. Daniel leaned closer, holding her hand delicately. "Mom, it's me. You're awake. You're safe now." Tears streamed down Daniel's cheeks, a mixture of relief, joy, and lingering guilt. "I won't leave you again," he whispered. The woman's hand twitched and found his, gripping it with more strength than before. She tried to form words, weak and hoarse but unintelligible. Daniel encouraged her gently. "It's okay, Mom. Just rest. You're alive. That's what matters." Rahim watched silently, feeling a deep, unspoken pride. He knew the battle was far from over, but the most critical step had been taken, the miraculous return of life against impossible odds. Hours passed with careful monitoring. The mother's responses grew gradually stronger. Her fingers now tightened more firmly around Daniel's hand, her eyes followed familiar movements, and her breathing became more stable. Each milestone was celebrated quietly, an intimate acknowledgement of resilience and hope. Finally, she whispered a name, Daniel's. His heart leapt, tears blurring his vision. "Yes, Mom," he said, leaning closer, his voice shaking with emotion. "It's me. I'm right here." A faint smile spread across her face, fragile but genuine. Daniel squeezed her hand tightly, allowing himself a small laugh of relief. Rahim stepped back slightly, giving them space, while feeling a surge of quiet satisfaction. Throughout the day, medical staff worked carefully, adjusting medication, monitoring vitals, and ensuring the environment remained calm and supportive. Every change in her condition, every small sign of improvement was a victory in itself. Daniel, exhausted but determined, refused to leave her side. Rahim remained, offering silent reassurance, a quiet presence that reminded them both of the miraculous turn of events that had begun with his attentiveness. By late afternoon, the mother's responses grew more consistent. Her fingers now tightened more firmly around Daniel's hand, her eyes followed familiar movements, and her breathing became more stable. The ICU, once filled with panic and uncertainty, now radiated quiet hope and relief. Daniel looked at Rahim with gratitude deeper than words could express. "You didn't have to be here," he said softly, "but you stayed. You gave her a chance when no one else did." Rahim shook his head, humility evident in his expression. "I didn't save her. I just noticed something that mattered. Sometimes that's all it takes." Daniel nodded, understanding fully the weight of those words. The reality struck him that life often hinges on the attention, courage, and care of someone willing to act when everyone else hesitates. As evening approached, the mother's condition stabilized further. Her eyes, once glassy and unfocused, now held clarity and awareness. She squeezed Daniel's hand again, the subtle but powerful acknowledgement of life and connection. Rahim stepped toward the door, ready to leave, but Daniel called him back. "Stay a little longer," he said softly. "I want her to see you. She needs to know who helped save her." Rahim smiled faintly, nodding. He stepped closer once more, standing near the bed with a quiet dignity. The mother, sensing the presence of Rahim, turned her gaze toward him. A weak but intentional nod formed, acknowledging him. The silent exchange carried more weight than words could convey, a recognition of courage, compassion, and attentiveness that had altered the course of her life. Daniel, witnessing this, felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and respect. "You truly are remarkable," he whispered to Rahim. Rahim only smiled softly, shaking his head. "I just listened," he replied quietly, "and sometimes listening is all it takes." As night fell, the room remained calm. The mother, still weak but more alert, rested peacefully with Daniel by her side. Rahim stood quietly near the door, watching the family reunited, the tension of the past day finally easing. The miraculous events of the day, from the funeral hall to the ICU, had left an indelible mark on all who witnessed them. A life that had been nearly lost had been reclaimed through courage, attention, and humanity. And in the quiet of the hospital room, as machines beeped softly and night enveloped the building, the lesson was clear. The smallest actions, the quietest voices, and the bravest hearts can change the course of fate. Life was preserved, hope was restored, and those who had acted with courage and compassion, like Rahim, had proven that true heroism does not come from wealth or status, but from the willingness to act when it matters most. Daniel squeezed his mother's hand one final time for reassurance. She responded with a gentle squeeze of her own, fragile yet full of meaning. Rahim stepped back, a quiet smile on his face. In that ICU room, a new chapter had begun, not just for the mother and son, but for everyone who had been touched by the miraculous events of the day. Courage, compassion, and attentiveness had rewritten a story that had once seemed doomed. And in the deepening night,
The gentle hum of the monitors became a lullaby of survival, resilience, and the enduring power of human kindness. The morning sun spilled through the hospital windows, filling the ICU with a soft golden light. The billionaire woman lay awake now, her eyes clear, her breathing steady, and her hand gently clasping Daniel's. The miracle of her survival had shifted the energy in the room from tense anxiety to quiet, profound relief. Each heartbeat, each subtle movement was a celebration of life regained. Daniel sat beside her, exhausted but vigilant. His eyes were red from tears and sleeplessness, yet they held a renewed focus, a determination to cherish every remaining moment with his mother. He brushed her hair gently from her forehead, careful not to disturb her fragile rest. "You're awake. You're really awake," he whispered, his voice trembling. The woman squeezed his hand weakly but intentionally, a silent acknowledgement of life and connection. Her eyes, now fully aware, scanned the room and rested briefly on Rahim, the janitor who had saved her life. She offered a faint nod, fragile but unmistakable. Rahim stood a few feet away, leaning against the wall, his expression calm yet deeply fulfilled. The events of the past days, the funeral hall, the near burial, the frantic race to the hospital, had left him physically exhausted but emotionally gratified. He had acted without hesitation, driven by instinct and observation, and now the results of that action were clear. The nurse entered, checking the monitors and recording vital signs. "She's stable," the nurse said softly, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "She's responding remarkably well." Daniel exhaled shakily, feeling a mixture of relief and residual fear. "She's going to live," he whispered, tears streaming freely. "She's really going to live." Belief restored. Rahim stepped closer to the bed, giving a respectful nod to the woman. "You've been through a lot," he said softly, "but you fought. That's what matters." The woman's lips moved slightly, forming words that were hoarse but clear. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes locking onto Rahim's. Rahim's face softened, a rare smile appearing. "I didn't do it for thanks," he replied quietly. "I just listened when others didn't. Sometimes that's all it takes." Daniel watched the exchange with awe. He realized that Rahim's courage had gone far beyond a simple observation. He had intervened at the moment that mattered most, altering the course of his mother's life. As the hours passed, the mother's strength gradually returned. She was able to move her fingers more deliberately, follow commands, and even attempt to sit up with assistance. Each small improvement filled the room with cautious celebration. Daniel stayed close, offering encouragement, sharing memories, and speaking softly to her. "Do you remember our trip to the lake?" he asked, soft storytelling. "You laughed so hard you nearly fell into the water." Laughing memory. The woman's lips curved in the faintest smile. Her eyes, though tired, followed Daniel's movements. Attentive connection. Even in her weakened state, the recognition of shared memories sparked life and comfort. Emotional reconnection. Rahim remained nearby, a silent observer, ensuring that any subtle change in her condition would be noticed. Attentive presence. As evening approached, the mother's strength gradually returned. She was able to sit up slightly with Daniel's support. Significant milestone. Her breathing was steady, and her color had improved noticeably. Visible recovery. She reached out and grasped Daniel's hand tightly, a signal of awareness and gratitude. Sign of life. Tears streamed down Daniel's face again. Emotional release. "You're here! You're really here!" he whispered, relieved hope. The mother nodded faintly, her eyes glistening. Fragile acknowledgement. Rahim, standing silently at the foot of the bed, felt the weight of the day's events settle upon him, reflective.
From witnessing near tragedy in the funeral hall to observing the painstaking recovery in the ICU, he realized that life's true power often lay in attentiveness and courage, deep insight. Daniel turned to Rahim, gratitude radiating from every gesture, deep thanks. "You saved her," he said softly, voice breaking. "I don't know how to repay you." Honest admiration. Rahim shook his head, humility clear in his expression. Modesty. "No repayment is needed," he replied quietly. "Sometimes doing the right thing is enough." Profound truth. The woman's lips moved slightly, forming words that were hoarse but clear. "You saved me," she whispered, her eyes locking onto Rahim's. Rahim's face softened, a rare smile appearing. "I just spoke up when no one else did. You wanted to live, and I wanted to notice." Sincere truth. The room was quiet, but the weight of those words filled it with meaning. Silent power. Daniel watched, tears streaming, recognizing the extraordinary courage of someone society often overlooked. Emotional respect. As night approached, the mother rested, her hand still clasped around Daniel's. Peaceful connection. Rahim stood near the door, a silent guardian, knowing that life had been preserved because someone had acted with courage and attention. Loyal presence. Outside, the city lights began to twinkle in the dusk. Tranquil outlook. Inside, the ICU was filled with warmth, gratitude, and the quiet acknowledgement of the miracle that had unfolded. Heartfelt calm. The day began with despair and near loss, yet it ended with life reclaimed, hope restored, and lessons learned about courage, empathy, and the profound impact of noticing what others fail to see. Emotional resolution. Daniel squeezed his mother's hand gently, a silent promise that they would face the future together. Loving commitment. Rahim, watching quietly, felt a deep sense of satisfaction and peace, humble contentment. The events of the past day had proven that true heroism does not always come from wealth or status, but from attention, courage, and compassion in the moments that matter most. Powerful lesson. As the mother slept peacefully, Daniel and Rahim shared a quiet nod of understanding, silent bond. Life had been preserved, hope had been restored, and the smallest voice had made the greatest difference, emotional closure. And in that quiet ICU room, a story of despair turned into one of triumph, a reminder that sometimes the most profound miracles come from the courage to act when it is needed most. Unforgettable truth. The night deepened, the monitors hummed gently, and a fragile but resilient life had been given a second chance. Serene ending. Daniel held his mother's hand, Rahim stood as a silent witness, and the miracle of attentiveness and courage remained etched in their hearts forever. Heartfelt resolution. Life had returned, hope had been renewed, and the world had witnessed the quiet, transformative power of compassion.